All right. Thank you. Morning, everyone. I think this panel actually feeds off some part of what we discussed earlier in the last panel, which we are supposed to be discussing around affordability. Telecom services are a complex service. You know, it's a mix of several converged services. Most times, telecoms poor adoption has always been attributed to affordability. People say adoption has been poor because of the high cost of the service. You know. So this panel was supposed to talk around strategies around affordability and perhaps what's going on in other climes and how we can tie up the affordability side of things. So I would just ask the panelists to maybe introduce yourself and then what you do, and then we can go up to the meat of the discussions.
Thank you very much. My name is Adenew. I'm here from Oxford Policy Management, a nexus between policy and decision making and use of technology. It's a leading global consulting house that was initially set up in Oxford University, but we've been operational in over 45 years, providing services in the region. We've operated in 120 countries. We currently have presence in 40 countries while having regional hubs in 15 countries. So that's a big background. And I'm currently the Ethiopian lead on activities in this part of the world.
Hello. Good morning, everybody. My name is Christian Sagarnaga. I'm in charge of the Enterprise Business Unit for Safaricom Ethiopia. In fact, this room brings me very good memories because back in October 6, 2022, this is where we celebrated the launch of Safaricom Ethiopia, roughly 1.5 years ago.
Okay. Maybe you'll also be telling us how affordable the services has been. Okay, so, you know, when we throw the discussion around affordability, I always want to look at it from the twin side of also availability on the operator side. The affordability on the customer end side could always be driven by the cost of the service, the price is sold for, what their consumer spend is. But also on the operator side, availability of the service, you know, are they in these communities? So I think my first question would be, how has the issue of affordability evolved over the years, especially for these services? Don't forget, affordability started up on the basis of tariffs, but now we're almost moving to bundled services. So how has this evolution happened over the years, and how was the impact of these of some of these initiatives and the transformation over the years? We'll start with you, Michael. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I think over the years, the discussion have moved not only from access perspective, which is the infrastructure part, and use, and in broader sense, to make the technology ICT affordable. There is an ecosystem approach to it. So from infrastructure, setting up the connectivity, satellite access, fibers and the like, we have to be able to include device affordability, the discussion and ongoing on content and application to make it not only being driven by mandate, but to have a value in the value proposition. The area of digital literacy, and then, of course, incentives. Now, this discussion have led to looking into upcoming and new technologies and leveraging these new technologies, being able to facilitate or make technology affordable. For example, we're seeing now, for example, in India, by using available big data and segmenting the clients much more efficiently. Now we're looking into predicting and customizing solutions that's much more tailored to individual levels. So as the discussion moves from infrastructure to an ecosystem approach, technology is also showing some hope how we could be able to take advantage and make it affordable as we move along.
Christian?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you see, we will talk about a little bit the global challenges in terms of affordability. When you see what is happening in every geography, even in developed or markets in development, you do have this income disparity, right? That's the first challenge that you have in every single market. Maybe here in our developing markets, we have bigger disparity between the top 1 or 5% and the bottom 50%. That's definitely one thing that as an operator, you need to overcome when you enter a market. There is obviously, when you talk about penetrating markets and breaching those barriers of income disparities, how can you make affordable the first thing that telecommunications offer to customers, which is a device, right? So then devices are the first and foremost barrier to entry for low-income consumers, right, to enjoy your services. What we have seen historically, and this is coming from GSMA, the mobile prices for data services have been steadily decreasing, and back in 2022, when we have the latest data, we have reached historical lows. So the price per megabyte and the services have become extremely affordable, but we cannot say the same about fixed broadband services. So according to these studies, global studies, we are still in the same levels of pricing in fixed broadband services that we had back in 2017-18. So that's another challenge that as an operators we need to consider and how to overcome, right? There is the universal connectivity challenge, which speaks about basically internet users and how much they spend from their normal income, monthly income, in telecommunication services or data services. There are studies as well that speak that if, for example, on average, the consumer needs to spend more than 10% in mobile services, which are becoming a commodity, or fixed services, then your penetration will be 1/3 of the global average. So that is a barrier that is generating, especially in our developing markets, some challenges, right, in terms of digital gaps as well. Now, specifically in Ethiopia, there is one case that speaks to geographical challenges. And geographical challenge means, and I can share a little bit, originally from Bolivia in South America. Bolivia is a country quite similar to Ethiopia. It's 1 million square kilometers country, as wide as Ethiopia. We are landlocked, so we don't have access to sea. There is only one difference, that in Ethiopia, maybe you have 120 million population, and in Bolivia, we are only 12 million. So we are 1/10 of Ethiopia. But what does landlocked mean for a country? It means that when you are trying to bring internet, because internet is simply, and those who are in ICT understand that internet is being transported through submarine cables, right? Most of this connectivity cannot reach Ethiopia directly because we don't have access to submarine cables. So the prices that you have to pay in Ethiopia are normally 4 to 5 times higher than the prices that countries that have access to submarine cables pay on average, right? So when you talk about those challenges, operators need to be creative. And for us, one of the things that we have done to overcome the infrastructure challenge and how to bring affordable internet to Ethiopia, or to try to bring affordable internet to Ethiopia, is of course to roll out a massive network here in Ethiopia. I mean, Safaricom, we have invested to date $1.4 billion. We are the single private largest investment in Ethiopia.
Million or billion?
Billion.
Billion.
Billion dollars between license for different services and the infrastructure that we have rolled out. So you have to have continuous investment to develop access to affordable services in Ethiopia, right? So we have developed this connectivity to Djibouti, Mombasa, where the submarine cables are landing, so to bring the connectivity. Our own network, it took us time. Of course, we roll out from the moment we got the license in 2021 to now. Since then, we have been continuously rolling out services here, right? Then the other opportunity that we have as an MNO to leverage on is obviously competition, right? So competition is an advantage for a market to grow penetration and to grow the market in general, the market itself, right? To enable competition, we are in a process of continuously growing the network. I think maybe my CEO share a little bit of what Safaricom is doing, or maybe my technical partner share a little bit of that before. But yeah, that's one of the opportunities that we have. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. So Michael, quick thing. I mean, in the course of this event, we've always talked around the new emerging technology. You know, in the next 5-10 years, where are we going to be? What are the new things on the block? Somebody has to pay for these services. When it gets to the end user, it has to be paid for. What kind of models do you think operators and service providers should adopt to make sure they are able to provide these services at an affordable scale to the end users, and as well break even? I mean, how do you think these emerging technologies will scale in the affordability scale?
I think that's a very interesting question, and maybe I would take a collective effort to cross that road. But maybe some of the things in terms of the access to infrastructure, there are initiatives that governments take a role in subsidizing, being it the telcos or directly the consumers. That benefits the adoption. So I think in Brazil, Chile, Indonesia, South Korea, and India, there are use cases that highlight some of the lesson learned from this incentive programs. But not all initiatives have to be government funded or supported, especially in continent which is resources very scarce and priorities are competing. So we have to be mindful. There is a great room for private-public partnership. There is a great work that's been done in Rwanda with, if I'm not mistaken, with Korean Telecom that have built a 4G robust infrastructure, which the private and public sector have co-created, and then both benefits the citizens. As previously been highlighted in previous sessions, of course, there is the Universal Service Fund, which aims and targets some countries to be successful in implementing it. But also, there are innovative solutions, as we've heard earlier on, that looks into alternative means of connection. Once we address the infrastructure part of the issue, we have to be able to look into the device so that it is accessible for all, both with consumers, so the intended objective of transformation could be achieved. In this space, a use of machine learning and AI tools have helped manufacturers to streamline their production processes and having their inventory minimized so that they can transfer values directly to consumers. So there have been case studies in this regards. There are innovative financing mechanisms adapted by mobile operator and others, which de-risk and then make the consumer access to technology much more easier than it is. So from this perspective, of course, the national ID programs here in Ethiopia and other countries have been leveraged to provide micro loans provided and facilitated by the telcos so that devices could be easily accessed through. And content creation, there is big data and machine learning opportunities that we can leverage and learn from the likes of Netflix and others. On digital literacy, a community-based approach, I think India have been very successful and other countries as well, that looks into a much community approach for creating awareness as well as sharing infrastructure. In the area of a tariff and incentive, I'm of the opinion one size fits all does not work. We try to harmonize as much as possible, but there is a great study by GSMA and others that looks into economic and social factors for decision makers, so policymakers can leverage this data making decisions. So there is, I think, a lot of toolkits from the technology perspective that address various aspects to make technology affordable.
Christian, new technologies, how affordable would this be? Same question. How do you think telcos should play in this?
Leverage
yeah.
on the new technologies. It's interesting because we are a greenfield. So in theory, we should have thought the way the new technology will evolve. And this is what we are seeing in global trends, what we are doing in Ethiopia from the moment we roll out our network. What do I mean? I mean, for example, the simplest case is a software-defined network, native cloud networks, in which you can leverage on AI to optimize your NOPEX. So that will help you to have a little bit more affordable services. Secondly, in the past, you used to have the cases in which when you have to provide proper fixed broadband connectivity, you really need to offer fiber to home, fiber to business. Now we are seeing more and more cases in many neighboring countries in which with 5G technology, you can already provide 500, 600 Mbps, which is sufficient for small, medium enterprise and home applications. So definitely new technologies, and accompany new technologies with affordable devices is a way to unlock.
Okay, so in some environments, I mean, there are arguments around regulators themselves, setting floor plans and ceiling plans in terms of pricing. You know, regulators in some environments to try to set a window for the operators to. How successful can this really help the market? How successful are these models in terms of driving adoption or making it affordable for the end users? Is that a model you think could be sustainable, especially from the operator perspective, where they spend the money, they run their models to see what it will cost, but then there is a big telco regulator somewhere who says, okay, you can't charge between this and this. So is this a model that works somewhere? Are there other use cases you think in that space that has worked? Michael, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure there is a trade-off in environments. There have been case studies that showed when there is much more lenient or hands-off approach on tariffs, where markets have got little competition, there is less incentive for operators to compete on price. So the other way to look at it is, in mature markets, the assumption is the market would be able to fairly determine where the price should lie. But living in an imperfect world, sometimes the government have some say to make sure that adaptation could be facilitated. But please bear in mind, there is also another side to this argument. Provided that we build enough value, even provided having the ceiling or the minimum in place, there are countries and jurisdictions that made it work. So we just need to look into what this connectivity or technology put value to the end consumers, and then see a win-win situation, co-creating with all partners.
Absolutely. I think it's critical. And a brilliant example is ECA and the recent determination for Ethiopia. It was a cost-based study in which you analyze, for example, what should be the voice or SMS termination rate. And that enables a new wave of competition in the market. So I think it's extremely fundamental to have a strong regulator, very smart and clear targets, and studies that are cost-based to enable further competition. Absolutely.
Maybe before I go to the next question, maybe we could take a question from the audience.
Thank you, the panel, Chairman Chidi. Chidi mentioned, as the chairman of the panel mentioned, that he said, we talk about emerging technologies. What tech should be adopted, and how can they be scaled in the affordability? How can we scale them in the affordability scale? That was, I think, the first thing I had, and that caught my attention. Coupled with the last comment by the actual last speaker who talked about MTRs, that is mobile termination rates. Now, looking at the two, and I haven't had, in the course of conversation in this particular panel and the panel before, when we're talking about affordability and new emerging technologies, ideally, I think we should have probably mentioned other technologies that probably can enhance affordability. A young lady here asked a question before about prospect of changes in, or rather, changing dynamics to be brought about by the LEOs, that is low Earth orbit satellites. Now, one other emerging technology that has not been mentioned in the course of conversation here today and even yesterday is high altitude platforms. We have in the last conference of ITU approved high altitude platform base stations, HIPs, to operate on 2 gigahertz and 2.6 gigahertz spectrum. That is another emerging technology that is likely to come on board and cover rural communities at cheaper rate. When I say cheaper rate here, because it's going to be cheaper for the operator, because you have one base station that's having a radius of 100 kilometers over the air, basically covering larger rural areas. Now, when you are putting that cost of one base station, of course that will be cost, I'm sure, one or another, it may not be the same cost as covering 100 kilometer radius on the ground infrastructure. Therefore, deploying of such new technologies should certainly impact on the prices and affordability, and therefore it should also impact on the mobile termination rate that has been talked about. So I think there should be some bit of discussion about the emerging technology on the HIPs, that is high altitude platform based, IMT based stations. I think it's something that seems to be missing that we should be mentioned about, because it can affect termination rates. Thank you.
Okay, that would be an interesting thing to look at, especially to now look at the modulations and what kind of bandwidth you can scale from that kind of platform.
Actually,
that would be interesting.
Nothing changed. It's just the same IMT-based station. It's just IMT-based station on high altitude platform.
That's interesting. I think there's a question I wanted to ask about. If you look at the space today, and I think I will start with you, Christian, on this. If you look at the space today, you have I don't know if I would call it some entropy or some chaos going on. You see OTT and hyperscalers are now in the submarine cable space. Okay, you see the submarine cable space. People are now fiber cos and DC owners. You see the telcos are becoming techcos. So there's this whole, are we heading to some kind of entropy? Is this some chaos loading? Are we coming back to instead of having the ecosystems, are we coming back to unified kind of platforms that will now have the big guys who can now become big hegemons that will now create prices and rates as they want, and of course impact the affordability? Christian, I don't know if you want to start with.
Absolutely. I see it more as an opportunity, if you are smart enough, to create new business model for telcos, right? You have to create partnerships. If you talk about the consumer side, in many cases, you are already creating strong partnerships with the content providers, gaming providers, so to create more value for your service. Remember that the conversation 2-3 years ago was about telecom is becoming a dump pipe, and everybody else is profiting from the services. Now we are seeing more and more that telecom is creating partnerships in which, with the different digital financial services, distribution that you have for airtime, and with your same technology advancement, you are a very strong partner for the very same content providers. And it is the same in the enterprise segment, right? We see ourselves more as a solution enabler, but solutions by itself cannot be created by one company. It shouldn't. So you have to have strong partners in every single part of the ecosystem, so to create a comprehensive solution. So I see it more like an opportunity if we are smart enough.
Michael, you want to take a shot at that?
Yes, I think before my current role, I come from a technology background, especially in the satellite space. I've worked in the satellite for 10 years or so. So I appreciate from Dr. Bashir the comment, the technology have been there. I think there's a significant use case to it. And I'm sure as the value grows, the adoption would increase. In terms of looking into a glass jar to the future, what the industry landscape would look like, I think that would be a very challenging exercise. But there is a growing sort of convergence, as well as an area where core competences of a particular industry is shifting by the rate and complexity of the innovation at play. So I think one have to be looking into all emerging technologies, what it means, and then how to be able to absorb the shock and be resilient. So one have to always put their eye on the ball, as they would say. And the great thing is this will continue to evolve. So the emerging technologies in AI, machine learnings, and the like would further shift some of the landscape, and it will be interesting times, both for technology providers as well as regulatory operators.
If you have to make a recommendation to the policymakers, I mean, we have a couple of them in the audience. You have to make specific recommendation to these policymakers on how to accelerate digital affordability. I mean, what would that be? What would be the key recommendations you make to policymakers to help accelerate affordability?
Now, coming from a policy background, the prescription model for policy, I think we have to be mindful to local context and environments. But having said this, there are some interesting, at least broad-based consideration that could be made. We understand the rate of technology is ever evolving, and the policy realm to catch up it's going to be very challenging. So as it's been shown in Ethiopia and the market and in others, having a sandbox approach for new and emerging technologies is very important, so that we can harness the full potential and looking into the future. There is a strong room for private-public partnerships. I think this is a collaborative effort. So to make it affordable, I don't think subsidies, whether for the operators or direct to the consumers, are the only thing to consider. So all stakeholders have to be involved. Alternative financing mechanisms, I think, are a growing interest in this space, and looking into how to leverage that in the country context is very important. Promote, I think, digital literacy in the education systems are important steps to take to make it affordable as well as usable in achieving the overall objectives. There are, I think, interesting use cases in universal service funds that could be explored in other countries. How to make it contextualized to a local market is something that could be looked at. And in broader sense, I think there is a growing consensus. There was a conference that just happened this week I was part of that looks into the Africa Forum for Sustainable Development. And the discussions in that discussion for Africa or for the continent being able to fulfill the SDG as well as the aspiration of the Africa 2023 agenda, there is international and multilateral organization that was willing to be a stakeholder in this engagement. So leveraging the UN and bilateral and multilateral players is also, I think, part of the equation, and looking into from a regional perspective. And I think these are some of the points.
Christian?
Absolutely, fostering healthy competition is a key mandate to enable and grow the digital ecosystem. And secondly, promote and support the rollout of infrastructure. It's quite critical in every market, and in particular in markets in which you are landlocked.
But just a quick throwback. In some market, maybe like a mine market, for instance, at the end of every year, you actually see when the operators, declare their books for the year. You see humongous profits, in some of these markets. Can we force these operators to make services more affordable? I mean, I'm just taking a radical kind of thinking. Is it possible to force operators to, look, we talked around Africa, 1.2 billion people, almost more than half of that population is unconnected. How do we make sure all these, this half of the population is connected and they can afford the services? So can we start price fixing scenarios? I mean, that's perhaps my last shot to either of you. To both of you, actually.
So what I feel is a healthy competition will enable that naturally, right? When you have a healthy competition, the market will drive naturally for sake of growing towards affordability. And we have seen in many markets where you have these cost-based studies supporting competition in voice, SMS, and possibly data in the future. So definitely is something that I strongly believe we are in the right track. competition is key for affordability.
Michael?
I think there is definitely that component, but I think I go a bit further as well. Universal service funds, and then being able to require operators to make future investments to create more value have also shown a very strong case for making technology much more adaptable and usable. So I think there is room for both. And I think it's a collective social responsibility for every stakeholder to make sure that we create value to the unreachable, unbankable, and then unserviceable in some respect. So I think it's a responsibility for us, for all of us.
On that note, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your insight, and thank you so much, the audience. We appreciate the time. Thank you.